Thanks for listening to Fluff and Crunch, where we talk about the connection and sometimes disconnect between system, setting, and story in tabletop RPGs. We're recording now, and so we're gonna, well, let's see. But yeah, all is well here. How are you?
Yeah, it was good. I was doing some American economics today.
But anyway, we don't have to talk about real world stuff today. We're surrounded by it. We swim around in it. One of the
we're still
reasons
talking about real world stuff. It's your real world stuff.
It is, but it is real world stuff. Period. But we play these games to get away from that for a little bit and exercise some muscles that maybe we don't in the real world, or we'd rather not in the real world, or something like that. So we can get right to that. Now, actually, though, have you done any gaming in the last week and some since we last spoke?
I played more Kill Team at the end of the weekend with Scott and Brian, which it's like a smaller scale 40k. It's only a handful of models. So we played that, which is good because the week before we did that as a cooperative thing with like an AI. It's really, it's not really AI, but that's what they like to call it, isn't it? Kind of AI bad guys. So, but yeah, that's that. No more role playing. How about you? You carried on Traveller?
No, actually, we were. I was down 2 of my 4 players this last weekend, so we played. We actually demoed one of the adventures that I had written for this game convention that I'm going to, that we're going to talk about, using my my D12 based system that I've been developing for this horror game, and it spectacularly did not work.
Oh.
And so I have completely, I have done the bootlegger reverse. I just smoked 5,000 miles off my tires by skidding around in slow motion, like a bad action movie, you know?
Oh, well, since that's a good segue anyway.
Oh, it's a perfect segue.
All right. So you have a convention at the weekend.
I do.
Next weekend. It'll be
tomorrow.
No, so it will have happened by the time that this.
It'll be in the books by the time this goes out.
And rather than running a system that people might, or that you might know, anyone might know, you're using your proprietary Jeremy's horror game system.
Now, here's what happened. The original plan, and this is an annual convention in my hometown, Friday through Sunday. And this year, a friend of mine and I decided to go in on a hotel room. So we were staying there Friday and Saturday night. And no doubt by Sunday morning, I will be absolutely raw. I will not have a voice. I will be very tired. And I will probably skip the Call of Cthulhu game that I'm signed up for at 9 o'clock on Sunday morning.
9 o'clock. Fair enough then. Yeah. That is too early.
So we're going to talk about.
To do it at 9 o'clock.
I didn't set the damn schedule.
What a silly time.
The nameless they who run the convention did. But before we get to that, we have to you have to read the introduction before you can read chapter 1. And the introduction is obviously today we're going to talk about con prep, like convention prep, whether you're a GM or a player. And we're going to hit on a couple of different things, or I'm going to hit on a couple of different things because I've done this for a number of times, and here I am doing it again. And so the first thing I want to touch on, and I can tell my sad tale of woe and how I have recovered from it, is from a GM perspective. If you are running games, obviously, you have to have your sessions prepped. Duh. You have to have your sessions prepped. And to the point that, here's a tough thing with con games, they're typically, role-playing games, typically a 4-hour block.
Right.
And actually, no matter what, regardless of the system, putting that aside, the story that you're going to run has to be a little more on the nose, a little more obvious, and a little more plot driven, preferably starting off in medias res, because you only have 4 hours. And you have to, I believe you have to approach planning con games with a little bit of a drive it like you stole it kind of approach. Like you are going to, it is better to burn out than to fade away. That is what you're going to do, because that's what people come to cons for. You go to the movies to see big action on a big screen with great sound and all that stuff, and you expect big things to happen in 104 minutes or something like that. You watch a TV series for a slow burn and character development. You can't do you can't do the latter well in a con game. And so you have to rely on archetypes for characters. You have to rely on maybe even some slightly more obvious tropes for your adventure, because people need to get into the action and the story immediately. So there's that. Now, you mentioned system. Obviously, running a system with which most people are like, if I were to run anything 5e based, obviously that's boneheaded easy, because anyone and everyone knows how to run that turd, or not run it, but play it rather. And anyone who doesn't, it's really easy to communicate to.
Yeah.
Now, my challenge is that I put this in the game description. I'm not trying to be coy about it. That this is a system in development, and that I will provide a final version to anyone who plays via Drive-Thru RPG. So everyone knows, people who are signing up for this know that this is not a system they've probably played before. And I've been developing this D12 based system here for several months. Mm-hmm. And I've play tested it a bunch with my home group, maybe like 5 or 6 times. I guess that's a bunch over the last several months. But I tried some things this last weekend, and the story, one of the 2 stories that I'm running, and one of the stories is actually a story I've run before. It is Boston. It is 1775. The British are using some kind of fell, like, evil magic to go after the Patriots. Hey man, someone's got to be the baddie, and these Patriot agents who are in the know of supernatural things have to go after this before the cover of their secret operations is blown. So I've run that before. So reworking that has not been a big deal. I've run it a couple of times, actually at this convention, but many, many years ago. So adjusting it to this other system was not difficult. So there's that. The other adventure, originally I was going to run like a 50s, like classic kind of Back to the Future era thing, where the characters are innocents. They don't know about monsters, and then monsters fall on their town and they have to deal with all. And that was what I demoed. So I wrote the thing out, all detailed and whatnot, and then demoed it using some aspects of this system I'm developing in new and interesting ways that I thought would fit. And it didn't work. The story didn't work. There were so many holes in it that I had not recognized. It was terrible.
So is it more this? So is it both that's the problem? Because for the fact that you're saying the other one worked, the system is okay. So is this mostly the story, or is actually the system as well?
It was both.
Or is it that's not good.
It was both. It's total train wreck. So that was Saturday night. So I was like, oh, this is great. I'm going to be running this in less than a week. I am now -1 adventure, and I'm really having serious thoughts about the viability of this system.
Oh, no.
Because there are giant holes in it. And it wasn't. Anyway, so what I did in the last 3 days is I wrote a totally different adventure that is basically a haunted house adventure. And once the player, the characters are going to be amateur ghost hunter types in 1998 who want to fill their MySpace page with all kinds of ghost evidence, and they foolishly go into the haunted house before it gets torn down because it has all these local lore attached to it, and then the house decides to kill them and locks them down inside the house. So that should work. I'm confident about that working because of how limited it is. What I have also done is, in the last 4 days, is I took the 2D20 version of Aris that I developed it, and I quickly kit bashed the hell out of it to turn it into a 2D20 horror system. So
you're not going to use your D12.
No, I found
either of them.
I found some. I found a bunch of broken stuff in it. But anyway, my point is, and this is circling back to the topic for today, if you're going to be a GM at a convention, you need to have a story that is maybe a little more railroady, a little more plot driven, and right to the action right away. And it needs to be a system with which you are familiar enough with the most salient points of the system, the most salient parts of the resolution mechanic, because you never want to flip through rule books at the table.
Yeah.
You want to be able to make rulings and move forward. Because the moment you start, or dickering with players over rules interpretations, no, screw it. We're just moving forward. This is how we're going to resolve this. We're going to move forward. And the problem for me with this system I'm developing is I don't have a rule book to flip through, and I don't have notes that made sense. So I was like, okay, I'm just going to torch this, and I'm going to move to a version of 2D20 that I know functions because I've played it a bunch, and I just need to adjust the types of skills that I had for this horror game into it, and I'm good with it. So we're fine.
So
but
what,
yeah, you
so what version of two? So like the sort of 2D20. So basically acting Cthulhu, because that's what we did.
it's like somewhere between Octung. I took from Octung the weapons because it's modern day, but otherwise it's Eris, which obviously I don't.
Oh, so Aris, because you've got the weird things with specializations and skills and stuff.
Yeah, but to be honest, doing characters on the fly for 2D20 is actually really easy. I mean, you and I have played it so much. We know it. We know the system so well. So, but here's the thing: you obviously you have to know your story. You have to have pre-generated characters. I suggest whatever you capped your group at. And I always cap my RPG sessions at no more than 5 people. I always make 6 characters. I make sure that the characters' abilities, skills, and other things overlap enough so that none of the characters are indispensable, right? Because you don't want to have, well, oh crap, nobody took Bob, and Bob's the one who is absolutely, you can't do that. So there has to be overlap in the utility of the characters for the session. But they also have to have some high points, that is some very like salient features. You know, a one-line descriptor and then a couple of like a skill or two that really make them stand out. And then there's overlap beyond that. So that's what you need for the session. And then as I always recommend is jumping into the action or giving them a compelling hook immediately. You can't bury it. So as a GM, that's what you need to, at a minimum, that's what you need to be ready with.
I've got 2 questions. Firstly, so you did say that like the other story you've run in different systems.
Yeah.
But you would recommend if you're going to run something at a con, you probably should have run through that adventure.
Yes. Yeah. Good point. I agree. When I originally did this years ago, I don't remember if I play tested it or not. I'm not sure. But yeah, I suggest play testing it with a group or some parts of it, or at least running the ideas by gamers that you trust, whose judgment you trust, because there could be what you don't want is an adventure at a con to go off the rails and go in, like back itself into a plot corner that you can't satisfactorily get out of. And that's what happened with this adventure that I ran this last weekend. Okay. I realized, wow, the story didn't work because my players approached it from angles and sought to immediately react to the action I dropped them into in ways that I had not anticipated, but were perfectly reasonable. And I was like, okay, if I have other groups approach it like this, or maybe in some other way that I don't anticipate, I don't know how to make this function. Yeah, sure. You can solve lots of things by just punting, by making up stuff as you go. But then you risk not having a satisfactory story or having, enemies or things like that are interesting because you did not plan for them.
Yeah. Now, my other question was,
shoot.
Mainly because this is a horror game, and you actually said that particularly the haunted house one, they're going into a house and the house is going to try and kill them.
Yeah.
What happens if a player dies? No. What happens if a character dies 1 hour into the thing?
Well,
because it sounds like that's your goal. It's like
no. Actually, my goal, I will obviously when the house locks itself down. When the party of fools are inside it poking around with their little camcorders and their flip phones, when that happens, obviously is up to me. Right. So there will be a triggering point where it's like, okay, now it's in my terms to you, the house is after you. And that's when they've got to figure out what the heck is going on. I am going to start it off with a little bit of an interesting happening around the house to pique their interest, to wave the banner around and make it very clear that's where this story is heading. So I'm going to start off with some interest and some activity, and then let them go into a little bit like a montage of research and looking, figuring out what do they want to learn about this place before they go into it. So there's that. That's going to take up time, so that I want them to go in, and I have a list of clues that they can find by researching and asking people, doing things before they enter the house. And then once they're in the house, I'll see how they use those clues to try to determine, is the place really haunted? Are all these creepy tales we've heard about the Finch mansion really true? And then there'll be that triggering point where I decide, okay, now you've pissed off the house. Now it's out to kill you. And then they'll have to rush to figure out which of their clues will lead them to the resolution that will save their lives. So if someone does buy the farm, it will be in the back half of the session. And I don't know, maybe I'll just give them a ghost or a skeleton to run.
What would normally happen in a con? Because obviously, that's the feasible thing, and players die and you fudge. Would you normally, like in a con, someone, do they pay to be there? I don't know anyway. Whether they're paid or they're just rocking out.
They've paid for a ticket to the convention. No,
okay, so that's fine. But I mean, that's the thing, like, they've planned to do a 4-hour thing and their character die. I'm not talking about yours, just in general.
Yeah.
What would you recommend is just avoid killing? I was going to say players.
I would, honestly, that's where fudging a roll,
players,
especially in the first half to maybe 3/4 of the session, that's where fudging a roll or adjudicating a character death as something else. You lose this piece of equipment, you suffer this setback in the story, something like that. Yeah, I would recommend not offing your characters too early, unless you have a direct backup. Like there's another, they're the heroes, but they have some flunkies with them, and you can hand them a flunky to run. Yeah, you don't want to vote someone off the island halfway through your session, and then they're dissatisfied. Yeah, and obviously, you have to make sure that character death is interesting and satisfying in some way, shape, or form, or amusing, so that players don't feel, ripped off. So that's the big thing is the preparation. You got to, and honestly, especially any scenario that involves investigation, recognize that you really don't need to throw red herrings at your players, because they'll just come up with them themselves. They'll run off in some weird direction that you never planned. Actually, keeping them on track is probably more of a challenge than not, because you don't know these people. So the plot needs to be the plot and the clues that drive the players through the general route that you have anticipated. You need to make those things pretty obvious. I have maps printed out. I have all the pre-gens made. I also have a short, and I highly recommend this, I have a short rules reference with like momentum spends and stuff like that on it, so that I can have that at the table so people could easily glance at that and say, okay, I that's how I do a target number. I suggest something like that too, unless it is 5e, unless it's a system that everybody knows, or you're going to have people at the table who can coach others. You do that. So I've got all that ready. I got all the game stuff ready. But there's more to a convention than just the game. Obviously, if you're just going as a player, you can ignore all of that. But there's more to the convention than just, you don't have to show up with a character more than likely, unless you're playing like, I don't know.
I was going to say player. Surely if you're a player, you turn up with the right attitude and that's it.
Bingo. Show up with the right attitude, kick in, encourage others to kick in and be part of the game and to play well. And and that helps. That'll do the trick. Now, the other things that you have to plan for, and this is assuming that it is a multi-day convention, but even if it were a one-day, bring food. Bring fruit, bring protein bars, bring things to munch on that are not messy, that don't require prep, and can survive the day without refrigeration. There's a bit of advice. Bring water and or something else to drink. I would, and this may sound kind of kooky, but maybe in the few days before, if you're a person who believes that vitamins might help you, I would like gorge yourself on vitamin C and because you're going to be there for a couple of.
What are you doing at these conventions? I mean, I do Games Expo, which is I did 3 days last year.
I'm just talking about being around a bunch of dirty, unwashed people.
Oh, I see what you mean. Okay.
And I mean, gamers, you don't know what sewer they're crawling up out of. My goodness.
See, I've done plenty of 2-day miniature tournaments, and usually by day, I think I've pretty much decided I'm going to stop doing those because by day 2, I've usually had enough.
You just gassed.
Because I'm playing the same game again and again.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah,
Games
see,
Expo, I did 3 days this year, but it was a case of get there, be there as long as I feel like, and then and I think every day I left like mid-afternoon,
yeah,
and I went and did something else.
yeah.
I
See,
think I wasn't there the whole time.
the way this works out is that it it starts off like I'm playing in a game at 2 o'clock on Friday afternoon, and that goes until 6. And then I have another game at 8 p.m. that goes to midnight. That's one I'm running.
Oh my
Then I have a
God.
game Saturday morning at 9. And then I have another game at 2 that I'm playing, and another game at 8 that I'm. So there are 4 hour blocks, and then there are open like they're bracketing meal times, dinner and lunch, with about a 2 hour open period. And there's a vendor hall to go around and look in. There's other like pickup games and things going on. The place where the convention is taking place is actually a like a casino resort. In our area. And so my buddy that I'm sharing a room with, we're going to probably get up on Saturday morning and go to the gym and run. And, it just, I think that the thing with a convention, especially a multi-day, if you're going to be there, is you have to pace yourself. You have to pace yourself. It may sound like a great idea to like stay up until 2 or 3 in the morning, but if you are running a game at 9 a.m., you owe it to the people who signed up for your game to show up in one piece and functional. So, so yeah, I mean, I go over the top on decent snacks and easy to carry around non-refrigeratable foods, a water bottle, obviously, and also a willingness to just step away for a little while. Like I doubt I'm going to like go back to my room and hide, but I might go like find a corner and just like, have a cup of tea or a cup of coffee or something like that and just relax for a little bit, because it makes for a long couple of days for sure.
Yeah, I mean, the thing I always try to make sure, even just on a 1 day, for a 1 day tournament, is taking like pretty much like a bottle of water per game. So that's for like every 2 hours. So if I'm playing 4 games in a day, I'm taking like 4 bottles of water with me. I might not drink it all, and halfway through the day, I'm like, right, I want a Coke or something. But that'd be my plan, to try and drink, because actually if you stay hydrated, at least you're still functioning. The worst thing you do is
another thing too, if you're running a game, usually, like I said, these are 4 hour blocks, and I think that's pretty much standard for role-playing game sessions. I always announce before we get started, I'll say, hey, listen, it's a 4 hour block, we all know, and we're going to take about a 10 to 15 minute break at about the midpoint. So I plan for that before we even start the session. We tell everybody we're going to take, like I said, 10 to 15 minutes, bathroom break, water break, food break, whatever, get up and stretch and move around break.
That's a good
plan idea. That in, because I think sometimes and I know I've fallen victim to this, where you think like, oh, this is the annual game convention, I'm just gonna squeeze the whole weekend, and then you end up actually burning out a little early in the process. And so if you're a little more measured in your approach. The other thing too, I'll say about running games is it's, you probably need to pay way more attention to reading the table than you would with a home game, because the people, you don't have to put as much effort in to read the table as to where things are going. But when you have a bunch of strangers, most people tend to be on their best behavior, and they do have a drive it like they stole it attitude. And I recommend that too. I'm like, listen, this is, we got 4 hours. Let's have a lot of fun with it together. And I say those things, and I think that tends to help. But reading the table is really important. So you need to remind yourself periodically, all right, am I trying to force my story through, or am I helping to manage a good story among these people? And I think you need to lean toward the latter of those.
I can imagine to some extent it's probably easier running a system that the other people aren't familiar with, because if you were trying to run like a 5e that people really know, or in a system that people know really well, like a Star Trek or Star Wars or Vampire, you've got a much bigger chance of hitting like either a rules lawyer or a law person that's just going to be, oh, that's not what happens. It doesn't work like that. Oh, my character. Well, I don't want to run that character. I want to run this character, and I've spec'd him up with him.
I actually had several years ago, the first time that I ran Star Trek Adventures at this convention, I think it was in 2017 or 2018, I actually had an argument break out between two of my players over how to solve this engineering problem. and they were like, one of them lost. He completely lost the plot. He lost grip on the fact that all this was made up. It is a game. Like he was dead serious about quoting all this stuff from like engineering manuals. It was like, okay, I need to talk, and they were genuinely pissed off at each other, going on and on about how to go about like balancing and like it was like two pissy engineers in one of the television shows fighting each other over how to sequence repairs and what to fix and what was actually the cause of the problem. Like, oh my gosh, none of this is real. Can we get back to having fun, please? And my sense is that some people are like weird enough that they really get off on that. But yeah, there is a point where you're absolutely right. A very well known, like I'll never run Star Wars at a convention because you'll have that guy at the table who will and you just want to be like, just shut up. Just shut up with your canon.
Star Wars canon is kind of a mess that I feel like you can get away with.
So many people get so torqued about it because they own their part of the canon. They claim their part of the canon is the canon. It's so tiring. Yeah. But yeah, that's something to pay attention to. And I think you're right. If you have a system with which people are not familiar, is either a lesser known system or it's something you've developed, as long as you can communicate the core mechanic and the core processes and options clearly, then actually you're safe. Like I've run Eris a couple of times last year and the year before, and a couple of sessions per. In fact, the last 2 times, that's all I've run. And it went really well. And it was a table full of people who had never played 2D20 at all. But again, we've talked about this in the past. Like, how do you teach a new player a game? You trim it down to the most fundamental, foundational aspect of the core mechanic and the player options and how things happen. And you trim it down to that, and you just keep it minimal and streamlined because you don't have all this time. And no, you're not going to get this deep depth of use of the system. You're not going to get that kind of skill level and proficiency with the system, but who cares? You're there to have a good time and to tell a story where the contrast between the bright and the dark are very significant, and probably far more so than you would in a longer term game.
There we go. I think you've covered that quite well. I'm still curious about how badly wrong this game went on Saturday, but I guess we can leave that for another episode when you return to your D12.
Okay, I had concerns about how the system handles a lot of action, and that is like, maybe several rounds of combat or action sequences, not just 1 or 2, but and there's a feature of the system that I think is really good, but I'm finding it cumbersome to figure out how to manage it within action sequences. The other problem I'm having is that the monsters, the things with a capital T, I'm having a really hard time settling on how to do stat blocks for them, because I don't want them to just mirror, a ghost, you don't just have it mirror a character's stat block. Because a ghost needs skills.
You're thinking like how in a good chunk of the early 2D20 games, the NPC stat blocks, or in fact, or 5e for that. Oh no, 5e does 5e now, but they didn't used to. Because like you didn't used to have like the strength, dexterity stats for monsters. It just had to hit, roll the damage.
Like Conan offers up a different stat block for monsters for foes. And so I've been trying to settle on a stat block.
How to do it, yeah.
And not only just the list of things, but what goes onto that list. How do I put numbers and descriptors? How do I put mechanics to just descriptions of a beastie? And I have tried several different iterations, and I haven't been happy with any of them. And so then when I combined the issues with the action system, the action economy rather, with a different iteration of monster stats, it was just like none of it worked. And the story was totally jacked up and broken and had, like I said, Mack truck size holes in it that I was completely blind to. I had no idea that these things were sitting out there, but they were. So I am completely confident with 2D20. I'm completely confident with the War for Independence era scenario because I've run it several times and it's worked, and it's worked out a little differently each time. But the trail of breadcrumb clues is clear enough that I can drop, if the players don't go after the clues, I can drop the clues on them in such a way that it'll keep the story moving. And the haunted house story, I've run stuff like this before, and having once you limit the player's options or the character's options for movement, you're trapped in this house, and it is very clear that that is a bad thing, and so it's very obvious what you want. You want to get out. If you can't, you need to figure out how to make it stop. So I'm very happy with how those things come. And it was interesting, actually, the quick switch to 2D20 and figuring out how to take the fear system that I developed and put it into 2D20. It actually worked out pretty smoothly, because both of the systems are dice pool based. So actually making that translation was not nearly as big a deal as I initially thought. As I went, oh crap, on Saturday night after the session was over, I was like, that is not going to work. That is so not ready for prime time. Neither of those things, system or story.
Oh dear. Well, I'm sorry you had to go through so much hassle to sort this out, but hopefully you got it all done now and you'll have fun.
Yeah, actually, it takes the pressure off my system development, and it gives me something to work on, but it also gives me something I know will work. Yeah, and obviously with which I am familiar. This Eris, mostly Erisified, and to be honest, adding in potentially guns or things like that is like big deal. Anyway, these are like pinhead amateur ghost hunters, like I said, in the era of like Yahoo web rings and MySpace and flip phones, and when you had to like count your cell usage minutes or your bill would balloon, and that era, this is like relatively low tech. So I don't even know if they're going to have firearms. But if I wanted ranged weapons, just translating something out of Octung into this is easy because my damage stats are the same for how much damage a character can take and stuff like that. So I'm not worried about it at all. Actually, I'm kind of jazzed because I feel better about the system going into this than I did with the one that I've been developing. Even after the playtest set, I felt like worked.
Cool.
Yep. So we'll see how it goes. And how it all works out. And next time we talk, I can give a short report on how it went. Thank you, as always, for listening to Fluff and Crunch. You can join our Discord, you can subscribe to the podcast, you can subscribe to the YouTube channel, all through the links in the show notes. Thanks again. Have a great day. We look forward to talking with you.